Hi everybody and welcome to another theory video based around theme 1's 1.2. What we're going to be looking at together in this video is 1.2.8, the theory of consumer and producer surplus available in markets. Right then, first of all, consumer surplus. The idea is when you demand a good or a service, you are meant to be a rational consumer. So what you would do, you'd work out the maximum price that you are willing and able to pay for a particular product. So you would base that on how much satisfaction or utility that you would expect to get from a particular good or service. So what you might do, you might work out, for example, that you think a product is worth £20. So you think you might get £20 worth of benefits from that particular product. If the market price, however, is £12, then you are willing and able to pay £20 for that product, but you're only paying £12. Well, that would mean that your consumer surplus is £8, the gap between what you are willing and able to pay and the market price. So what you've got there is what we call free satisfaction or free utility. You're willing and able to pay 20, but you only pay £12. So guys, consumer surplus is clearly therefore the difference between the market price and the price that you are willing and able to pay for that product. So look at this demand curve that we've got here. Now, if we had an individual demand curve, we've got here somebody's demand for a particular good or service. And I could draw this demand curve based on the assumption of diminishing marginal utility. So remember, the idea is here that when you demand additional units of the same particular product, then each additional unit will give you less satisfaction than the previous one. And the example we've often used, if you're eating slices of pizza, the first slice of pizza will give you more satisfaction than the second, third, fourth and fifth slices of pizza. Right, so when you look at this demand curve then, what we know is for this particular good or service, for the first unit of consumption, this person was willing and able to pay £4. In other words, they thought they would get £4 worth of satisfaction from it. For the second unit of consumption, they would be willing and able to pay £3 for it. That's how much satisfaction they would get from it. The third unit of consumption will be worth £2 for them, and the fourth unit of consumption will be worth only £1 to them. Now, if we assume that the market price is the red line, £2, so that means every unit of consumption will cost the person £2. Well, when you look at it, then that first unit of consumption, the consumer was willing and able to pay £4 for it. If they only pay £2, then they are getting from this £2 worth of consumer surplus. In other words, free satisfaction. The second unit of consumption was worth £3 to them, but again the market price is £2, so they've got £1 of free satisfaction from this. The third unit of consumption, the consumer would have been willing and able to pay £2, and they do pay £2. So you would buy this because ultimately you're paying the price that you value that particular product at. But what you wouldn't do here is to buy the fourth unit of consumption. You only value it at £1, but the market price is £2. So you would get negative consumer surplus on this particular product. So guys, the idea would be that unit of consumption 1 and 2 will give you consumer surplus. Unit 3 you will buy because ultimately you're paying what that particular product is worth. So if we want consumer surplus, it's the gap between what you are willing and able to pay and the given market price. Let's now think about what producer surplus is. Now, what we know is that when firms produce, if they're being rational, we assume they do so to make profit. Now, I'm going to think about this supply curve as a market supply curve. I'm looking at the number of businesses that are willing and able to produce in this marketplace. Now, look what I've got. For the first firm, they would be willing and able to produce if the market price was £1. The second firm would be willing and able to produce if the market price was £2. The third firm would be willing and able to supply in the marketplace if the price was £3. And the fourth firm would be willing and able to produce if the price was £4. Now, again, what I'm assuming is that the market price is £3. Now look at that then. The first firm would have been willing and able to supply for £1, but they have received £3 for their particular product. So what they've got is £2 worth of producer surplus. So think about that. They were willing and able to supply for £1, but the market price is £3. So the producer surplus is the gap between the market price and the minimum the firm would have been willing and able to accept to supply that particular good or service. So firm 1, on every unit of output produced, they will derive £2 of producer surplus. The second firm, they were willing and able to supply for £2. So if they were to receive £3 for the product, they're deriving £1 of producer surplus from this particular product. Firm 3 was willing and able to accept £3, and they do get £3. So they would produce, but there wouldn't be any free satisfaction from the firm. They're getting the price they'd be willing and able to accept for that particular product. Firm 4 would not supply, but the reason being they want £4, but the market price is only £3. Right, and if we now bring together both consumer and producer surplus on a market equilibrium diagram, you can see we've got it here. So look at consumer surplus first of all. In this marketplace, the market price is P star, and quantity star will be demanded and supplied in this marketplace. So look at the yellow consumer surplus triangle then first of all. This is the gap between the market price of P star and what people were willing and able to pay for this particular product. The producer surplus is the blue triangle, and this is the gap between what firms are willing and able to produce the goods and services for and the market price. It's worth noting, everyone, that when we are in market equilibrium, we are maximising both consumer and producer surplus. At that given price level, there is no additional benefits of additional production or consumption. If we were to look along that demand curve, consumers wouldn't be willing and able to buy any more at P star. Firms wouldn't be willing and able to produce any more at P star. So in market equilibrium, we maximise both consumer and producer surplus. Right, I now want you to hit pause and think about these 3 different questions. So A, explain the concept of diminishing marginal utility. B, use a diagram to explain consumer surplus. And C, use a diagram to explain producer surplus. So if you can now hit pause, write down your answer. When you're comfortable, hit play, and we'll watch the rest of the video, please. Right, we're now going to be thinking about how consumer and producer surplus can change. So what we know then is that demand and supply can shift. So what I'm showing here is the impacts on a market of an outward shift in demand, but also an outward shift in supply. Now, in that first diagram, imagine we're in equilibrium originally based on demand 1 and supply 1. So at price 1 Q1, the idea would be the original consumer surplus would be from P1 up to A, and then to complete the triangle to C. The original producer surplus would be from P1 across to C, and then down to complete the triangle E. So we can see really clearly what the original consumer and producer surplus was. Now, when we get an outward shift in demand, what we know is the market price will grow from P1 to P2, and the market will become bigger and move from Q1 to Q2. But look what's happened then. The new consumer surplus is the area P2 to D to B. The new producer surplus is from P2 to D to E. Now, what that higher price will do, it would raise the level of producer surplus in the marketplace. The area P1 to P2 to C to D would show the extra producer surplus on offer in the marketplace. In other words, the gap between what firms are willing and able to supply and the market price has increased. There is now more producer surplus available in this market for businesses. So when demand moves outwards, firms are really, really happy because you're going to have an increase in producer surplus. Right, look at the second diagram then. Again, I'm assuming the market's in equilibrium originally at P1Q1. So again, I've got the same areas of consumer and producer surplus. So P1 to B to A would show me the original consumer surplus. The original producer surplus would be from P1 to B to D. So again, I can see really clearly what the original consumer and producer surplus available in the marketplace is. When supply moves outwards, we know that price levels will fall from P1 to P2, and the market will get bigger, and it will move from Q1 to Q2. Now, I can now see the impact this had on consumer and producer surplus. The new producer surplus will be from P2 to C to E. The new consumer surplus will be from P2 to A to C. Now, this will make consumers really, really happy because you've got an increase in the gap between what people are willing and able to pay and the market price. So there's now more consumer surplus on offer in this marketplace. Now, the actual gain in free satisfaction for consumers is measured by the area P1 to P2 to C, to C to B. So P1 to P2 to C to B is the gain in consumer surplus. So what we know then, everyone, is when supply moves outwards, there will be an increase in consumer surplus. Those lower prices will give people more free satisfaction when supply moves outwards. When demand moves outwards, you're going to get a gain in producer surplus. Let's now think about what happens when demand moves inwards and when supply moves inwards. Now again, if I assume that on the left-hand side diagram that the original equilibrium point occurs at P1 Q1, then the level of consumer surplus would be the area P1 to D to B, and the original producer surplus would be P1 to D to E. Now, when demand moves inwards, there will now be a reduction in market price from P1 to P2, and the market will get smaller. Now, we can see the impact this will have on consumer and producer surplus. The new consumer surplus will be P2 to C to A. The new producer surplus will be P2 to C to E. Now, because price levels have fallen, there's been a reduction in the gap between the market price and what firms are willing and able to produce. So what we've got now is a reduction in producer surplus, and that is measured by the area P1 to P2 to D to C. On the right-hand side diagram, we can see what happens to consumer and producer surplus when you have an inward shift in supply. So again, when we're in the original equilibrium point at P1 Q1, the original consumer surplus will be P1 to C to A, and the original producer surplus will be P1 to C to E. Now, when the supply moves inwards, the prices will get dragged up in the marketplace and the market will get smaller. That would therefore mean that the new consumer surplus will be P2 to B to A. The new producer surplus will be P2 to B to D. Now, this will make consumers less happy. We're going to get a reduction in consumer surplus, and the loss of consumer surplus will be the area P1 to P2 to B to C. Okay, so you can see that again, there's going to be an impact on the welfare available in the marketplace. Right, guys, now just to wrap things up then, I now want to think about those 4 different diagrams. So it's about showing how changes in supply and demand will impact on consumer and producer surplus. So again, hit pause, put down your answers for these questions, and when you've finished, you've reached the end of the video. Thank you very much.